So, why do men avoid therapy and what makes them actually go? I want to start here with a question, one that you can maybe just sit with for a second. Have you ever found yourself Googling something like, do I need therapy? Or signs that you need a therapist, and then just close the tab? Maybe you've been going through something and have just told yourself that, I'm fine, or that you'll deal with it later, or that this problem wasn't that serious, anyways. Or maybe the entire idea of going to therapy just felt wrong for you, like it just wasn't your thing. And if any of this sounds familiar, I just want you to know that you're not alone in any of this. That's exactly what this video is about, because I think that there's a lot more going on underneath the surface than most people want to talk about. And that's kind of what I want to get into today. So it's really important that we understand that there is a cultural component to this. Most of us as men, and I'm talking across many generations here, have been raised with some pretty unspoken, or rather very overt and spoken rules. Typically, this is be strong, be stoic, protect, provide. Handle your own problems quietly and by yourself. Don't burden people. They're already going through too much. Don't ask for help. If you can't somehow figure this out on your own, then you're somehow defective or not good enough. So if something's wrong, just push through, keep going, and grind harder. And I want to be careful here as we talk about this, because these values don't come from nowhere. They've been passed down from our fathers, who learned them from their fathers, who lived through very deep survival situations such as wars and depressions, and they faced real hardship and adversity. There were times in history when falling apart or giving ourselves permission to look within just was not an option. And so that sense of what we might call like resilience, it helped to build things. It helped keep families alive. So there's definitely something real in honoring this. But something got lost along the way. You see, nobody taught us the difference between being strong and being numb. Typically, nobody sat us down and said something like, hey, there's a version of toughness that actually serves you. And there is a version of isolation that is just wearing a suit and hiding. Most of us grew up learning how to control our emotions, to cope, to push things down, how to move on. And that works for a while until it doesn't. Because at some point along the way, the thing that we've been managing starts to manage us. It may begin showing up in our relationships, in the way we react to certain situations. Maybe it's in the distance that we feel about people that we truly care about. It could kind of just be like this little voice in the back of our heads when we're alone or right before we go to sleep at night that's kind of there telling us like something's off. Something's not right here. And then, even in these moments when we know that something is off, the idea of engaging with therapy or opening up to somebody can almost feel like a betrayal to everything that we've been culturally conditioned to believe. It's almost like we're admitting defeat or giving up. And I completely understand. If you've spent most of your life, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years, not giving yourself permission to look inward, the idea of turning towards all of it can certainly feel overwhelming. A lot of questions might arise, like, where do I even start? How do I do this? What if I try and nothing happens? What if I try and everything about my life changes? And these aren't irrational fears by any means. They're very human. And I think one of the biggest pieces here is that we don't have to figure everything out before we get started. It's kind of a fallacy in some way. You don't even necessarily need to know what's wrong or have like a clear plan of action or even have hit some kind of a rock bottom. You just need to be willing to look within. And that's honestly the only requirement to any of this. Now, the surface level explanation for why men avoid therapy is usually something like men are taught to be tough, men have been taught not to talk about their feelings, men have too much pride. And yeah, there's definitely some truth in a lot of this. However, I think there's a deeper reason that is a little bit more maybe logical or rational to understand here. I think it's helpful to think about it this way. From the time we've been young, we've been rewarded for solving problems. We were taught to fix the car or close the deal, handle things, figure it out. And so we kind of have learned how to look at the world in sort of a problem solving way. Where something's broken, let's find a solution and let's fix it. And that's very helpful, and it is definitely a strength. And then when we start thinking about therapy, if we're looking through the same mentality, the message that we might receive is, well, I might be broken, or I'm the problem that needs fixing. And from that mentality, it's like, of course, I wouldn't want to engage. in a therapeutic process. However, I want to offer a little bit of a reframe here. Therapy isn't necessarily about fixing what's broken. It's about understanding what's been hidden from us. And it's a completely different thing. One way of looking at it, like the problem solving way, is about a sense of deficiency. Whereas looking at it through more a way of exploration is more about discovery than it is deficiency. And once we kind of shift in the way we look at it, it seems a little bit less like something that we need to fail in order to work with, or be a failure in order to receive therapy. And it can make it seem like it's more like something worth doing. There's definitely some data that I think would be very helpful in understanding some of this as well. As the data stands today, men die by suicide 4 times more than women do. Only about 1 in 3 men who's actually struggling with their mental health seeks help. In 2025, the search for a therapist for men went up by about 42%, which tells me that something very significant is changing in our culture. Men are starting to look. They're starting to seek answers about what's been going on. We as men are confused about roles, about what it means to be a man, and we've been kind of handed older rule sets that just aren't applying to a modern landscape. So men are starting to ask questions. They're starting to knock on the door, so to speak. And as men, it can be very helpful to have somebody meet us at this door. Carl Jung, who's a Swiss psychoanalyst, has a great quote. He said, "Till you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Me, what he meant by this is that when we don't deal with what's going on inside, it doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear because we're busy or we don't look at it. It starts to run the show from somewhere that we can't even see. And it typically gets louder and louder unless we do something about it. It could end up in divorce or violence or a car wreck or a big accident of some kind, something to shake us and wake us up. Right? If we're seeing negative patterns or different things happening in our life, this isn't just happening by happenstance. There's something going on with our psyche that is creating this pattern. That's attempting to get our attention in some way. There was a period during my life where things were looking pretty okay from the outside. I'd gotten a bachelor's degree. I was working a sales job. I was living life. I was, hanging around with people. I was functioning, but I wasn't moving forward. Definitely felt stuck. And I kind of always had this sense like something just wasn't right. I could at times pretend it wasn't there or numb it away, but it was always kind of in the background for me. I started to kind of turn inward a little bit. And I started to uncover some childhood memories that I didn't even know I was carrying. And I did what I think a lot of men do. I tried to handle it on my own. They tried to rationalize it or stay busy or do self-help and improvement around it. And it helped a little bit, but what I realized was that I was just really circling it. I wasn't really getting to the depth of what was going on. And there's kind of a real difference between those two things. And that's when I personally reached out and attempted to find a therapist for myself. And it was scary. It wasn't necessarily because I thought that therapy was for weak people. I didn't really believe that. But I think it was because if part of me opened up that door, I couldn't unknow what was behind it. And I think that that's what scared me and what I think scares a lot of men about engaging in therapy is it's not necessarily, the emotions or the talk or getting to, be vulnerable with somebody. It's touching the truth about who we are and being radically honest. It can be scary, but it can also be extremely rewarding as well. There were definitely therapy sessions where I started walking in, worse off than when I had begun the session. And it felt like it was really slow and like nothing was happening. But over time, I started to notice a shift. I started to actually begin to understand myself and not just manage myself. Patterns that I'd been living in for decades had started to become noticeable to me. And I recognized when I can see a pattern, I can do something about it. So therapy for me just really made me more of who I am. And that changed everything for me. My relationships, how I show up, the work that I do, the kind of man who I want to be. It helped me to understand my values and to live with them, live from them with integrity. And that's why I, as a therapist, work with men specifically, because I know what it's like to stand outside that door and not want to open it. I want to talk about a couple things that can keep men stuck. Because it's usually a couple of specific things. One of the first ones is a fear of maybe what these men will find behind the door. Typically, as men, we've built some kind of like a strong identity or a mask that we've been living with. And this mask is kind of showing the world that we're capable and in control. And going to therapy is kind of a sign to that mask that, oh, maybe we weren't as in control as we thought we were. So I'll be honest with you, therapy will probably shake some things loose. But what gets built in place is a lot more solid and real and foundational. Another fear about therapy is that a lot of men think, well, what if it doesn't work? How is talking to somebody going to help me? And that's kind of a subtle fear too. Like, because what if it doesn't work? Then what? What am I supposed to do? At least when we haven't tried something, then our hope is still intact in some way. It's almost like trying and failing feels worse than not actually trying. And I understand that completely. But I want to say something important here. A lot of men have bad therapy experiences. Maybe they've experienced therapy that didn't fit or therapists that just didn't get them. There's an approach that felt a little too passive or clinical. And then they typically walked away from therapy thinking, oh, therapy doesn't work. And they go and tell their friends this and have this opinion about therapy. I'm going to say this because I think it's really important. Finding somebody who actually knows how to work with men can make an enormous difference. And I'll get back to this in a second, but I want to describe one more fear that I think men work with, which is the fear of losing control. Therapy typically asks us to go toward things inside of ourselves, things that we've been actively moving away from for most of our life. And for men whose sense of self has been built around one that feels in control and in power, that could be pretty scary. It can feel kind of dangerous. And I get that. All of these fears make sense. And none of them make you broken or weak. They just mean that you're human. The real question I like to ask, and I encourage you to ask yourself, is the cost of staying where you are starting to outweigh the discomfort of doing something different? Sometimes we move at the speed of pain, right? So what is it that actually gets men to walk through this proverbial metaphorical door and get to the other side and see what happens? Like I mentioned earlier, usually it's like a moment, like a relationship ending or a panic attack, or maybe he becomes a father and he's like, okay, I really don't want to pass down these traits I'm seeing in myself. Sometimes it's some kind of a journey or a random epiphany at 3 a.m. when something kind of cracks open that can't uncrack. Or sometimes he finds somebody that speaks his language. It could be a therapist or a video or a podcast or a book of some kind. Something where he finally thinks, oh, this person understands me, understand what's going on with me. This is what I mean when I say finding the right fit matters so much. I don't think that men need to be convinced that mental health is important. I think that we just need to find the right person or the right container for us to do our work in. Someone to engage with us, to challenge us, and to sit with us empathetically. Robert Bly, who is a poet, part of the mythopoetic men's movement in the late 20th century, wrote something that I love. The long bow that can shoot an arrow into the unconscious can only be strung by a grown man. What I take from that is that our inner work requires real strength from us. It takes courage to look at ourselves with honesty. And when we can frame it this way, as opposed to framing it as a weakness, to me, the whole perspective shifts. I want to leave you with a couple of practical tips and tools just to help out. I think one of the first things that we can start doing is to notice what we're avoiding. Not maybe the surface level stuff, but a little bit deeper. Maybe some of the things that we're kind of afraid to engage with or think about. Something that might have a lot of charge to it. That's usually the thing that's worth looking at. So the first step is just to notice what's happening with you. Another great tool is to just do some journaling. Typically 5 minutes of journaling can really help us to organize our thoughts and help us to see a pattern within us, something that we can come back to consistently. You don't necessarily need like a structure or format, but just free writing. Set a timer for 5 minutes and just whatever comes out. And third, if you do decide to find a therapist, see if you can find somebody who specifically works with men. Maybe not somebody who necessarily just says they do on their website, but somebody whose content or language really speaks with you. Trust your instincts on that. If you engage in therapy and this person doesn't feel like a fit, that's more information about the relationship than it is about the entire, therapeutic form itself. The hardest step is typically the first one, but then everything can get a little more manageable after this. Now, if you've made it this far into the video, I don't think that's an accident. Something in this video is landed for you, and I'd encourage you to pay attention to it. If you are looking for support, either one-on-one or a men's group, I am a licensed therapist and I do support men with this journey. If this sounds like some of the work that you're interested in, you can click the link down below and you can schedule a free consultation with me. As I mentioned, I also run a men's group. So if you ever want to be around work with other men who are doing this, who actually want to talk about what's going on in their lives, there's a link for that down below as well. You've already started something by at least watching this video, so let that sink in. And it matters more than you might think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.